Okay, first of all, thank you for joining me. I know it's over lunch, so I really appreciate you guys being here. Even if you brought lunch, that's great. My name is Kate McConnell. I work for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I've been with them for about 6 years. I started in our Office of Financial Management, and I've been working in human resources for the last 3 years. So the stuff that I'm going to talk you through today has been really the last year's worth of my work, working with our staffing team to get our hiring process defined, improved, and provide a little bit more visibility into it in terms of workload, in terms of where different hiring actions are along the process, things like that. So with that, I'll kick off. Just a quick agenda. I'll walk you through kind of a background on how we got here and what sparked this project, which, like I said, started about a year ago. And then I'll talk through some of the process improvement efforts that we've done using data and visualization and analysis, including establishing our baseline, operationalizing our data, and then some customer tools that we've published and provided to people within the agency. And then I'll go into an actual demo of the workbooks that we're using so that you guys can get a feel for what it is that we're using internally to manage our work and what our customers are using to get a little bit more insight to our process. And then we'll have time for some questions. So we'll go through the OCC's state of hiring. We basically have 2 methods of recruitment currently. The first is a batch process. So about 2 to 3 times a year, we have recruitment cycles where we go out and we hire our examiner workforce, which is the bulk of our workforce, up to like in the hundreds. We'll post hundreds of vacancies at once, and then we'll have to cut down and go through the certificate issuance process, the interviewing process, and then we'll have 2 or 3 orientations or onboards per year. That happens within our examiner workforce. All of our other units are doing an as-needed recruitment cycle. So as they have vacancies come up or as they become aware of somebody leaving, they'll reach out to us and request that we post a vacancy for them. About a year ago, we had a risk assessment where agency leadership identified matching our workforce with our needs as our tier 1 risk to the agency. So that really kind of kicked us off to get our hiring process together, make some improvements to it so that we could really address what our leadership was thinking is one of our highest risks. This sparked implementation of a workforce planning effort that's going on agency-wide, and it also sparked this overhaul of our hiring process. We also had a series of external audits come through, and so with these audits, we became very aware that there was a lot of change needed in terms of our processes, our procedures, our visibility, our standardization of our process, and just the general hiring culture. So with all these things, we really dove in and decided to take another look at how we were hiring. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, so a lot of this is going to be focused around the process improvement efforts that we've been utilizing, and mostly all of it is really generated from the data that we're collecting and looking at on a daily basis. So the first thing that we needed to do was establish a staffing log. So prior to this project, we really didn't have a central point for all of our specialists to document and collect the announcements that they were working and the vacancies that they were trying to fill. Everybody was working in a silo. Maybe they had a list in Excel, maybe they had a handwritten list on their desk, but there wasn't a central point where we could go, anybody could go, to say, wow, these are all of the positions that we're currently recruiting for and trying to hire. So we developed a SharePoint solution. It's a staffing tracker, and there's a little screenshot of it here. But it basically just collects the basics of that particular vacancy that we're posting for. So everything from your position title to the different dates that are involved. So when we got approval for it, when we opened the vacancy, when we issued our certificates, location, where we're hiring, the hiring managers, and then any remarks or comments that the specialist feels are relevant to that particular announcement. So this is really our data collection tool. That was rolled out last January. And from that tool, we are exporting the data into Excel, and from Excel, we are importing it into Tableau, and we've created a series of workbooks that we use to manage all of our work. So our first step was really identifying our process. So again, when we sat down on this project, we sat down with all of the staffing, hiring managers, the team leads, and we asked them to walk us through from start to finish recruiting for a position. So we identified 5 major steps, everything from the time that an announcement either gets sent to our classification team for the development of a position description, or from the time, if there was already a valid PD in place, from the time that we received approval to recruit, up until we make the final job offer for that position. This is loosely based on OPM's 80-day hiring model, but that 80 days seems to be unobtainable. So we've developed different targets that seem more realistic for our process. So currently, if a position needs to go through the classification process, we're looking at 172 days from start to finish. And if it does not need to go through the classification process, we're tracking to 137 days. Now, one of the biggest differences between the OPM model and our model is the OPM model assumes that you have a valid PD in place and that you have a valid job analysis in place. We're still working in-house to develop a lot of those things, so that's built into our timeline. The other thing that we have built in as a result of some of the audit findings we've received are various QC steps along the way. So we have 4 different steps for quality controls, where each of our announcements goes to a QC team. They review the work of the specialist, and once it's approved, it moves on to the next step. So these have added quite a few days to our timeframes. So we are tracking against those target timelines, and we have also developed control charts to monitor these processes to make sure that we're operating within our means. From there, we set out to operationalize our data. Once we started collecting it, we had something to work with. Okay, well, what does this mean, and how can we use it? So we set up daily team meetings where the staffing team leadership meets to review all of the items in the tracker, any red flags, things that have exceeded their timelines, things like that. They're also managing the workload distribution amongst our specialists, making sure things are balanced, and making sure that we're tracking towards our target times appropriately. So from these reports, we've been able to effectively monitor workload distribution. We're able to see which items are aging, and not only after they've aged, but we're also monitoring them up until they age so that we can kind of jump in and say, all right, this one's about to show up on our nasty report. What can we do about it? And then we also get some insights into the outcome of our hiring actions. So once we issue a certificate out to management, what happens to it from there? Are we actually making selections? Or are the managers returning them unused? Are we not attracting the right quality of candidates? Things like that. So we're able to look a little bit further past just the hiring process as well. So this is a series of codes that I'm going to show you. This we've used to identify where along the hiring process an action is. We're really depending on the date fields in the staffing tracker to tell us that item's story. So this is really an if-then-else statement. It's basically saying that if there's not an EOD or an entry on duty, then check for a final job offer made date. If there's not one of those, then check for the certificate date to really help us narrow down where along the process it is. We're also using this aging report. So the aging report really shows us any item that has tracked beyond the target time frame that we've identified. So this is, again, a series of if-then statements to say, did it meet this target? If it did, then we're good. If not, it's considered backlog, and it will show up on our report. So I'm using this as a filter in some of the reports that I'll show you a little bit later. And then we have our customer tools. So one of our major goals through this was to rebuild customer confidence, which has been pretty low for us in the past, mainly because we had no transparency into the process. We weren't communicating expected outcomes, target timeframes to our managers. So we got this reputation of being a black hole. This is where I send my things. I have no idea how long it's going to take. It takes too long. I can't tell where it is. So we've really tried to implement some tools so that managers can get a better look at their actions and see exactly where it is and exactly what happened to it along the process. It's also allowing us to look geographically as to where we're hiring. So our workplace services group has found this useful to try and figure out office space and leases, that kind of thing. All right, so I'll launch into the actual tools that we're using. So I talked about the target timeframes and the process itself. So the very first page that you land on, and all of this is published to our Tableau server. So every manager at the OCC has access to this, as well as their analysts if they've requested access. So it's available at any time. We refresh it daily, usually by 8 a.m. in the morning. So at any time you can go online, you can log into the server, and you can see exactly what we're working on and where along the process your things are. So we started with a communication effort. What does our process look like, and what can you expect start to finish? So again, we have our phases down the left, and then we have our targets over on the right. So the first question we asked ourselves is, are we meeting our target time to hire? So that was the 137 and 172 days that I had mentioned earlier. So from here, you can see there's a filter at the top based on the final job offer made date. I only want to look at actions that have had a final job offer in the last year. So I've set this from October 1st, 2015 up through October 3rd, 2016, the last time I refreshed this data, to take a look and see, okay, over the last year, what are my averages for our target time to hire? I've outlined our targets here as the red reference lines. So the one on the left shows us for actions that have gone through the classification process. That's that 172-day target. And you can see how each of the different SDC areas, so our business units are plotted along the x-axis here. You can see how they're meeting up to that target that we've identified. And then over here, you can see on average, agency-wide, are we meeting that target? So on average, yes, we are. If you look at different business units, there are clearly some that are way under. That's the controller's office, so we seem to get those through a little faster than the others. And you can see that there are some that are, by and large, just not. Interestingly enough, this is our large banks department, and they are one of the units that does the batch recruitment cycles, which tend to take longer than just an as-needed hiring process. And then on the right, it's the same exact chart, but it just shows you for those items that did not have to go through the classification process, we already had a valid PD in place, how long those took. And you can see that we're actually coming in a little bit further under our target on average for those. All of this is filterable. So again, all of our managers have access to this on our server. Say I'm the manager for chief counsel, and that's all I care about. I can filter this down to show me just my office. All right. So that's the hiring process as a whole. Now I want to know which phases are giving me the most trouble. So are there specific phases where I'm consistently not meeting my target, or maybe ones where I'm coming under, and we can start to evaluate and maybe readjust some of our targets to be more appropriate. So this breaks it down by phase. You'll see the colors here. So we have a contract in place currently with OPM. They're helping to do some of our staffing. So we also wanted to look at actions being recruited by the OCC versus those being recruited by OPM to see how they differ. And then the grand total is both of them combined, our averages. So phase one is the time from which we say, okay, we go ahead and recruit, or we send it to classification up until we get that vacancy open. So this includes any work that's done on the PD in terms of classification, any job analysis or question development, things like that. So this is really one of our biggest steps in the process. Our target is 66 days. On average, we're coming in at around 40. And so from here, we can break it down even further. So for those that went to classification, we can see that the average is 39 days spent with classification. Our target's 35. So that allows us to ask the question, why aren't we meeting our target there? Is there something that we can do? Same for the time from when we get approval to go ahead and recruit until we open our vacancy. Our target's 31 days, and we're coming in at 31.87, so that's probably not a huge deal. So this works the same for the rest of our phases. You can see probably the biggest difference here is phase 5. We've given ourselves 20 days between when we make first contact with a selectee until we extend an official final job offer. And we're coming in at 1.7. So this was something that when we first sat down and identified our targets, we had no real data to compare against. We just sat down with the team leads. We wanted them to walk through the process. How long should this take? That kind of thing. And you can see that our estimate was way off here. So in version 2, we'll be revamping our targets to be more appropriate. And now we have data to back up those decisions, which is very exciting. So then we wanted to know if there were any outliers to our target timeframes. So just a different way of looking at this, are we meeting our targets based on our phases? We've created a set of box and whisker plots. Again, the reference lines indicate our target for that particular phase. And then all of the actions that we've recruited are outlined here in this box and whisker chart. So the median is where the light gray switches to dark gray. So you can see that generally for phase 1, we're coming in pretty far under where our target is, and we saw that on the averages as well. So just a different way of looking at it. And then down at the bottom, we have our target for our totals, our total time to hire. So our reference lines at our 137 and our 172 days, and then you can see where the different actions have stacked up against it. So I talked a little bit about how we have these QC processes built into place. One of the things that we're conscious of is clearly how much time that adds to our timeline as we're recruiting. So we want to make sure that we're aware and can provide accurate information to our managers on what to expect and how long that might add to our timeline. So we are looking at each individual step of QC and measuring to see how long it takes a particular item to get through there. Again, all filterable, but it is broken down already by our business units. So you can see up here we have the average time in classification and in QC. So we've got our business units here, and we have our average number of days here. But more telling is down below where we have our bar charts, and you can see for each step of the way, the grand total and how long an average would take. And then as an HR specialist, if you're consulting with your manager and you are working on a position for the controller's office, you can be a little bit more specific as to how much time you think that particular action will take to get through the different steps in the process. And then from a process standpoint, it allows us to evaluate in the future as we cut back on these QC steps, how much time can we expect to save? And then finally, we were looking at control charts. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we're looking at two control charts really. The first is our time to hire to make sure that nothing is way off the charts. So this is taking the day of the final job offer that it was made along the x-axis, and then the average time to hire along the y-axis, and it's plotting all of the different announcements or final job offers that we've made. We have a trend line going here, so you can see our trend line is going up. That's probably not a great thing. It means it's taking us longer on average as we complete these actions. But you can also see that it's a pretty healthy balance of up and down along that line, and it is staying within control. So this is showing within 3 standard deviations of the mean, and it's shaded in gray, so we can pretty easily see if anything were to pop out above that gray area, we know that there's an issue with our time to hire and that we need to step in and intervene. We almost got there back in September, but we stayed just under. And then we're also monitoring the number of requests that we're receiving and our intake. So this is the number of approvals that we get to recruit over time. And you can see that, again, it's pretty up and down across the bar, except for these peaks here. And these peaks are indicative of actions that were part of one of those big recruitment cycles throughout the year. So again, we have the 3 standard deviation area shaded here, and you can see that these recruitment cycles are totally breaking our system. So this was something that we used when we went and recommended that we disband these giant recruitment cycles and we move our examiner workforce onto a hire as needed model. So just kind of interesting. All right, and again, everything is super filterable. So if I'm only looking at the econ department, I can narrow in just on them. Oops, they don't seem to have anything here. So next we have our operationalizing the data. So this is really what we're using on a day-to-day basis with our staffing team to go through our actions and to make sure that we are operating effectively and doing what we need to do to get through the recruitment cycle. So this first chart just shows strictly what activity has taken place in the last X number of days. So when we originally built this chart, we didn't have these line graphs, it was just these bars. So strictly number of new actions from this date to that date. So this is looking at a month's worth of information from September to October. The issue with that is without anything to compare it to, it's meaningless. So it's great that we had 26 new actions in the last month, but what does that mean? Is that above average? Is that below average? Is that right on target? It wasn't very telling. So we added these line graphs here to show the average number of new items per week over the last 3 months. And so this was using one of the time filters, setting it to a relative date value of show me the last 3 months. So I don't have to go in and manually set this. Every time I update my data, this filter will automatically set to show me just the last 3 months worth of information. This down here, I still want control over, and I want to tell it which date I'm looking for, but that at least makes it a little bit easier to have a point of comparison. So you can see that over the last 3 months, the average is 3 new items per week. I'm looking at a month's worth of data, so I would expect the average to be about 12 new actions. We got 26, so something's happening. There's an uptick of requests that we're getting from our hiring managers. So we can kind of more effectively analyze what's happening and if it's normal, if there's a cause for it, and how we can prepare. And so the same applies for each of the other steps. We have the number of approvals granted, the number of vacancies we opened, the number of certificates that we issued out to management, the number of certificates management then sent back to us, and then finally the number of final job offers that we were able to put out. We're also very interested in looking at which items have exceeded their overall target time to hire. So this is filtered down to just show us any action that's currently in progress in our system that has exceeded either that 137-day or 172-day timeline. So fortunately, we don't have all that many in comparison to what we're working on, but these are ones that we can really start to hone in on and say, do I need to intervene here? Does there need to be a meeting with the manager just to update them, let them know what's happening, things like that. So Over here, it's organized by our SDC area. You can see whether or not it was sent to classification, which of course dictates the timeline that we're tracking it to. And then you can tell which phase it's currently sitting in. Towards the right, we get a little bit more specific. What position is it? And then here we have each of the different phases, the 5 phases, and you can see whether or not that particular phase was delayed at a certain point and it missed its target, or if it was completed in a timely manner. So this first one, for example, it got delayed in phase 1, phase 2 completed on time, and it got delayed again in phase 3. So it makes sense that we've missed our target here. We missed 2 of the targets out of the 3 that it's completed. When you hover over the bar, you get your tooltips. All of this has been watered down, so you'll notice that the hiring managers, the specialists, the remarks and notes, they're all Harry Potter themed. So you can see at a high level who the hiring manager is, who the specialist is that's working it, and then all of the relevant dates associated with that particular action. And again, you can filter all of this. All right. So that's the overall target time frame. We also wanted to get a little bit more specific and see which actions have missed their target that they're currently sitting in. So for example, if an action is in phase 1, it has 66 days to get from the time it's sent to classification until we issue or until we open that vacancy. If an action is currently in that position and it's 70 days old, I want that to pop up on my chart so that I can intervene and say, we've missed this target, what can we do to fix it? So this shows us all of the actions that fall into that category. Again, it's organized by business unit down here. These are our totals on the right, and then the colors tell us where exactly in the process that action is. So here you can see that we have 6 items that are in classification that have exceeded the 35-day target that we have for items in classification. Here we have 21 actions that are out with managers, and they're supposedly hiring or interviewing and making their selections, but they've missed the target to get it back to us. So from here we can start to hone in and say, all right, where is it? What can we do to make sure that it doesn't get delayed any more than it already has been? Down here is a list. So say I want to know which 6 positions are in classification. If I click the bar chart, it should filter down below. Well, for some reason that's not working. But you can go down here and see, based on these phases, where exactly those positions are, get a little bit more information as to which ones we're currently working. And then if you hover over here, you'll see again every piece of information that could be relevant to that particular action. So the dates, how many days it's currently or it's been in classification, and then at the bottom, any remarks or comments that the specialist may have provided that can give a little bit more insight as to what happened. So then we want to know, it's great to know which ones have already missed their targets, but it's even better to know which ones are about to, so that we can step in and perhaps prevent them from showing up on that report. So this is our approaching backlog or approaching aging report. So we currently don't have any actions that are in these first 2 buckets, but if we scroll down, we can see for those approaching phase 2 backlog, when our cert is issued, this target is again indicated as a reference line. So we give ourselves 34 days between the time when we close a vacancy until we give a certificate out to the manager. And so as these age, each day it creeps closer and closer to that target. And so on the right then we've published the date that it will actually hit that target, so we can intervene and try and get that cranked out before the target comes about. At the time it does come about, it pops onto that other report. All right. So we do the same thing for certificates. So every certificate that we issue has a 90-day life cycle. So the manager has 90 days to go ahead and do their interviews, make their selection, and get it back to us. We ideally would like to have them back within 30 days. That doesn't happen a lot. And then at 60 days, we want to have a tickler just to remind the manager, hey, you've got 30 more days before this is expired and we can't make a selection off of it. So we've got our target here as our green reference line. We've got our tickler here for a reminder to the manager. And then we have our red line here, which is this is expired unless you've had a valid exemption for exceeding that timeline. So again, it's the same logic. These bars creep slowly towards our 90-day target. And then we publish our actual expiration there on the right. So in many cases, some of them do exceed that 90-day, and we go back to the specialist, we say, hey, did you remind the manager? This is about to expire, we can't make a selection. 9 times out of 10, there is another side to the story, and that's that the manager has requested an exemption, we have granted it to them. So this chart's not perfect, but it does allow us to be a little bit more proactive in terms of checking in on those certificates. So then we wanted to know the outcomes of our work. So again, how many of these certificates that we're issuing actually yield a hire for us? And you can see by and large, we're at about 75%, which isn't terrible, but what's happening with that other 25%? I mean, at that point, we've issued a certificate, we've put a lot of work, so has the manager, into recruiting this action. So what went wrong? You can see about 5.5% of them were canceled. We don't know why they were canceled. This is an opportunity for outreach to the manager to find out what happened to that position. About 6.5% didn't have applicants, so that's pretty self-explanatory, nothing you can do about that. 7.8% are returned without selection. So that's another outreach point. What was wrong with these candidates that you couldn't make a selection off of this certificate? Is it how we're recruiting? Is it the quality of the applicants that we received? So from here, we can get a little bit more information so that when we go back out to recruit for it again, we can actually change our course of action to hopefully yield candidates that will be selected. And then finally, we have about 5% that decline the offer that we make to them. And then the last thing that we're looking at is our workload balance amongst specialists. So again, we've got specialists down here, all of our Harry Potter specialists, and then we have the number of actions that they're currently working. And the colors, once again, indicate where along the process it is. So you can see, by and large, most of our positions are currently with managers. They're making their selections. So that isn't necessarily work that that specialist has on their plate right now, but they might in another week or two. So something to be mindful of. So these are the tools that the team is using on a daily basis, but we also wanted to provide some tools for our customers so that they could get a better insight as to where their actions are. So they have access to all of the other graphs, but these are ones that are specifically geared towards our customers that they might find most useful. So this first one is really just a data dump of everything that HR is currently working on. So we have all of the actions. There are 255 actions currently in progress right now with our staffing specialists. Down here we have the different SDC areas, and across the top we have the different phases that these actions are sitting in. So the darker the green, the higher the color. You can see automatically this number pops up. This is 79 that are currently out with managers who have these certificates. So we can start to hone in and figure out where the bulk of our work is. Down below here, it's basically the same exact thing, just shown as a percentage of total. So we can see that about 31% of the actions are currently with those managers. All right. So then, managers would also like to know where along the process their actions are, and if it's been delayed, can we predict if this action will come through within the not the guaranteed, but the target time frame that we've outlined. So again, this is every action that's currently being worked. We can see by business unit and by phase. And then we can start to see, just like we saw in the earlier graph with ones that had missed their targets, if there have been delays at any point in the process and how old that particular action is. And when you hover, you get the same information, all of the relevant dates, any remarks and comments. And then finally, we're looking at where geographically we're hiring. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this just shows you our map of the US and the number of open recruitment actions that we have throughout the country. You can see DC pops up, that's our headquarters, we're usually recruiting there. So we've got 56 open actions for DC. We pop over here, San Francisco comes up as one of the other bigger offices. So you can start to see where exactly we're hiring. And then finally, we have this business unit dashboard. So one of our biggest challenges has been getting people to really embrace this tool. We still have a lot of managers who just want an Excel spreadsheet. So we've done our best to provide them exactly that, just on a different platform. So this is really just a data dump of everything that we're currently working on, the position title, the band level, where in the process it is, all of the relevant dates, any remarks and comments laid out there in front of them, no fancy tips or tricks or anything to trip them up. They have what they need right there. We have a sort by field here, so this allows the managers to say how they'd like this organized, if they want it organized by the band level, by hiring manager. I currently have it set as status, so is it in progress, canceled, complete, things like that. But when you click this, it will reorganize the whole thing based on how you've told it. All right, so I think that's all I have for today. One other thing I wanted to point out is back here on this chart, so the one where it shows us exactly how many positions are in these different phases. This is also a nested filter, so if you click here, it will filter this down to show you exactly which positions are within that status. So I think that's everything I have, so I'll open it up to questions. Yeah.
Are you tracking everything through that SharePoint site, or is this leading to like a BTS that you're using as well, or is it just purely based off the SharePoint?
Yeah, good question. So the question is if we're tracking everything in that SharePoint site, and the answer is yes, with the exception of details, which are not considered in a specific announcement that we are competing. But everything beyond just a detail, which happens on another SharePoint site, yes, this is everything that we are currently recruiting. Yeah.
Have you had any pushback culturally?
Any pushback culturally? Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been really interesting. We have some really good champions, which has helped. But by and large, I think the biggest pushback that we've had, I mean, two things. The first challenge is data integrity. So getting people to trust the reports has been difficult, and not for wrong reasons. I mean, there have been glitches with our data, and it has been challenging to make sure that what we're capturing is correct, because it's 100% up to each individual specialist to keep their records maintained properly. And then the second one has really been, I want a PDF, I want a printout, I want an Excel spreadsheet. So getting people to migrate towards an interactive tool online, especially in a federal agency, has been very challenging. So we're getting there, and we're doing it in small doses. We did a soft rollout of these reports, so it's really as managers come to us, we say, hey, we have a better way, why don't I show you this? It hasn't been forced onto them, and so from there, they've been able to pick it up as slowly as they'd like. And more they've come to rely on this, whereas before it was the specialists basically taking the same data from SharePoint, exporting it, and giving them an Excel spreadsheet. So we've really tried to work with the specialists to stop doing that, and to point the managers and their analysts to the server so that, you know, we can show them a better way, if you will. So we're getting there, but it's been challenging. Yeah?
Yeah, kind of to piggyback on that, so that was a great answer in terms of the customer side of it. How have you dealt with any challenges getting the specialists to actually kind of adopt it? Is it mandatory for them, or is it?
It's mandatory. Okay. Yeah, there aren't really any options as far as that goes. And I will say, I mean, when we started out, that was a challenge. And it's really been having the leadership on the hiring team being entrenched in this data, and that was its own challenge, and that took a couple of months for them, you know, to really adapt to it. But I think over time they've learned and seen the usefulness of it, and it's really become transparent where we go in there, we go into these charts every day, and we say, you know, with the team leads from the hiring team, okay, well, we've got this on our plate today. And they say, no, like so-and-so contacted me and they set this into the specialist, where is it, I don't see it. So now we've gotten it to a point where the team leads are the ones circling back around and saying, why isn't this in the tracker? So at this point, I mean, I would say probably over the last 6 months or so, it's gotten much more reliable. Our other challenge was not having a singular point of intake. So managers would come, they'd send an email, they'd give a phone call, they would drop by an office. There wasn't an official start date for the hiring process. So we've also implemented one of those. So now there's an automated recruitment form that they need to submit. When they submit that form, it gets tracked in its own database, and we are comparing what's in that database to what's in here to make sure there are no discrepancies between the two. So that's helped us tighten it up a little bit. Yeah.
You mentioned that managers put in some notes
Mm-hmm.
in the comments.
Specialists.
Specialists.
Yeah.
So there might be some intelligence on the why piece, right? You have a lot of what here.
Right.
What is taking so long?
Right.
But I think in those notes there might be a lot of why
Yeah.
taking longer. Have you done anything or thought about how to leverage that information?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, so the question was, you know, we have a lot of what up here, but there's a text field where the specialists are updating it regularly to say what happened. Have we thought about leveraging that to explain some of the why? And the short answer is we have not explored that. I do think there's a big opportunity there. And there are actually a few text fields that are largely hidden from these reports, where the QC team and the team leads on the staffing team go in and make notes about errors that they found or things that need to be corrected that we've hidden from customers. But I do think there's definitely an opportunity there to start looking at the text fields itself and get some more intelligence as to what's happening. Good idea, thanks. Yeah.
Kind of building off that, if you see a data anomaly, so if one unit is drastically different in their numbers, do you use that as an opportunity to say that, okay, I can do another Six Sigma project on this particular data part
Yeah.
unit and just continuously improve that way?
Yeah, so the question is, if there's an anomaly, are we then zooming in on that anomaly and looking for another process improvement effort? That is the ideal state over the lifetime of this project. We are not there yet. We're still trying to hone out and iron out the issues within the larger process. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, in an ideal world, after this first iteration becomes smooth and starts to operate a little bit more effectively, we would be honing in on things, like you said, the anomalies. I mean, particularly as it pertains to finding bottlenecks. That's been one of our biggest missions, if you will. I talked about the classification piece taking a while. We only have one federal classifier who can actually sign off on PDs. And for the volume going through there, that's why we're missing our target. And so, yeah, there's definitely that next iteration of then how do you fix those issues. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's been your biggest roadblock?
Our greatest what?
Roadblock?
Our greatest roadblock.
No?
Honestly, I think from my perspective, the biggest roadblock has been data integrity. That's been the biggest frustration for me, and I think that's been what's held back these reports from being accepted by and large. I mean, that was our biggest challenge to start, and like I said, we're getting there, but that I think has been the biggest roadblock. I think for the most part, even though this is a new technology and it's hard for people to adapt to, people are excited to be able to see what's happening, but they need to trust it first.
Just a quick follow-up. So for data integrity, do you use internal processes or do you use a vendor to come in and
Yeah, for data integrity, we're doing it internally, and to be honest, it's a lot of me just tooling around within Tableau to look for weird anomalies, negative date calculations, things like that, to start really honing in and saying, well, why was this vacancy opened after the certificate was issued? That doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's really a lot of just us trying to manage it internally. Yeah.
What was the biggest surprise to you out of this project that you didn't expect?
Biggest surprise to me out of this project. I think when I started this project, when we sat down to identify the process and the steps, everybody said there's no way. Every position is too unique. There's too many options. It can never be fit into this box. And it's not true. We've disproven that, and it's been kind of fun to watch the team really accept that yes, there can be a standard process and it can help you in the long run. So that's been a pleasant surprise. Yeah. David?
Are there any outside data sources you could pull that information in from rather than having the specialist put it in, either USA Jobs or
Right.
or something else?
Yeah, so so the question was, are there other data sources that we could use to get this information instead of the SharePoint site that the specialists are maintaining? We do have data in Career Connector, which would be a potential source. And part of the struggle there, though, is that that's not always updated either. So I think it's kind of like 6 one way, half a dozen the other. Pick your poison. I think we're still going to have data integrities no matter which route we take, but perhaps simplifying and making it just one source record as opposed to 2 that the specialists are responsible for maintaining might help. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. There's a survey that you're supposed to take, and then this is my contact information if you have any lasting questions. Thanks.